Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. Again, you can find out more about our organization, the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, online at tertiumquids.org, and our podcasts, our archives are available on YouTube. Search Freedom and Prosperity Radio there. Joining us now on the Newsmakers line, chief editor of, I believe right now, a publication with more readers than the Washington Post. It is Gun Rights Watch. Scott Prevett is on with us. Scott, welcome to the program. How are you doing, sir?
Hi, Joe. I'm doing great.
Gee, these days, the Second Amendment is such an obscure thing. Very few people talking about it. I'm sure you find it's very difficult to kind of gin up any kind of enthusiasm, he says, with tongue firmly planted in cheek. We just watched, I think it was Prince Edward County was some of the most recent ones, Tazewell. We've got counties all across. I think now we're at 91 counties across Virginia that have become Second Amendment sanctuaries. Am I under the number, or have I missed a couple?
Well, it depends on how you count them. We have on our site, we have 96 listed, but some of those are towns and cities. Those are only the ones that have passed, strict Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions. Mm-hmm. And I've got another 10 that have passed similar resolutions. They just didn't want to use the word sanctuary. So there's 10 of those. So that would be 106. That includes towns and cities, though. So I counted just this morning. If you count just the counties and you count just the ones that passed actual Second Amendment sanctuary resolutions, I came to 78.
Okay.
But if you include all of them, it's 106.
So no matter what I said, I was way off both directions there. Well, I'm glad you had the number. I want to start in Culpeper with the sheriff and his idea that he could, and it certainly seemed to have an impact on the governor, that if any of these gun-grabbing bits of legislation that have been pre-filed got passed, he would just deputize everyone in the county, and that would cover them, since most of them said, with the exception of law enforcement. Have any other sheriffs picked up on what he had done?
There was one, Grayson County, said that he would do the same thing. I guess he didn't. I don't know the specifics of any more details than that. But I mean, if he made a comment like that, then you figure that he's pretty much doing the same thing that the Culpeper sheriff is doing. So. Mm.
The reaction to these sanctuary legislations have gone from ridiculous to sublime, Scott, including things like Don McEachin in the U.S. House of Representatives suggesting that Ralph Northam could, and I quote, nationalize the National Guard. I'm glad Don doesn't have any sharp objects near him, because we need to be cutting his meat for him, apparently. But that got a lot of people inflamed. The story first spread that the governor was suggesting that he'd call up the National Guard and go after any of these before they could ever get into court. Is this just a case of a congressman with the predictable diarrhea of his mouth, hoping to get a quick quote in the local papers?
Yeah, I think it is. A lot of these Democrats, unfortunately, they come out with these inflammatory comments, and you have to wonder, are these people crazy? Are they just rambling? What are they saying? I also had heard that it was the governor who had made a statement like that. Then I saw other things saying that it was this McEachin. How do you say it?
Yeah, McEachin, yeah.
Yeah, that he is the one that had made those comments. You have to wonder, first of all, could it ever come to that? I mean, I just don't see that it would ever get to that point. And if it did, would the National Guard even comply? And even if they did comply, what would stop? Well, I mean, I would suspect that President Trump would pick up the phone and say, no, you're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So that would be the end of that. And then, of course, how many of them, if it ever got to that, would defect and say, look, yeah, I know you guys are planning going door to door to take guns, but I don't think I'm going to participate, so I won't be seeing you this weekend.
Well, it takes on a very Venezuelan or Zimbabwe-esque feel where the police department is supporting one, faction and the army is supporting the other, and they're doing battle on the streets of the capital city. And you're right. I think there might be some defections amongst the ranks. And somebody asked me if the governor is immune from posse comitatus restrictions, and we don't have our own Virginia Army. The National Guard is still the National Guard. He just commands the detachments in Virginia. So I think, not being a lawyer, that it would fall under posse comitatus, that you can't use American soldiers against American citizens.
Yeah, I looked into that a little bit too. Based on what I've read, and I'm not a lawyer either. I'm not even an expert in law, but based on what I said, supposedly he actually can in fact do that, which seems crazy to me. I just the other thing too is, like I said, the president could say, no, you're not going to do that. And it's interesting that you mentioned that Virginia doesn't have its own army, because apparently, from what I read about some of these counties who we're talking about actually creating militias, like Tazewell County, it's written into the Constitution that counties have the ability to form their own militias.
Mm-hmm.
And we're seeing movements now in some counties where people are actually trying to do that.
It takes a turn, though, Scott. Scott Prevett, the chief editor of Gun Rights Watch, is on with us this week, because they use, so typically, Virginia Beach most recently as a fulcrum for this, yet the two pistols that the shooter used in Virginia Beach would have been covered under zero of any of these pre-filed legislations. They didn't even have extended magazines.
Well, and it was a gun-free zone, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. On top of that, so already legislation had put it in play, and so why are there Democrats, I guess is what I really want to get at, that you have heard from, that are realizing that some of these delegates that they so gleefully voted in for the majority are perhaps a little bit more than they bargained for?
Yeah, there's no question there. I mean, this happens every time there's a mass shooting. And, of course, the mass shootings, like I said, are enabled by the gun-free zones. When I was a kid, I don't know how old you are, but I was a kid back in the 70s and 80s, and you never saw this stuff in the news. Mm-hmm. It wasn't until 1990 when we got the Gun-Free Zones Act, which was repealed and then put back into place. And that was pushed, actually, by Joe Biden. A lot of people don't talk about that. But it wasn't until after that you started seeing these mass shootings. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess the first big profile one was Columbine, so maybe it took a few years for it to happen. But then after that, it was, every year, 2 years. Now they're even more common, and they always happen in gun-free zones. So I don't understand why anyone would think it would be constitutional to have a place where the Constitution is suspended, where you can't have your firearm. That's crazy to me. I don't understand. People have to be able to protect themselves and others. So it's one of the things that we need to concentrate on to get rid of it.
There seems to be a disconnect to me, Scott, where we listen to folks who, when you push back on the idea of actual gun confiscation, and they say, well, what about just some common sense red flag laws? Yeah. We can all agree on red flag laws. Yeah. And then you bring up the hearsay testimony that's been used to impeach the President of the United States. Then you look at the politically correct cultures of schools where just speech can have you sent to the dean's office. I'm afraid more of a red flag culture than I am even of somebody trying to confiscate firearms.
Well, the red flag laws are probably the most unconstitutional idea that's been proposed by any of the gun control people in recent times. I mean, if you look at it, it's a violation of the Second Amendment, the Fourth Amendment. I think I read 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 10th, 14th. I mean, you have to purposely want to just completely ignore the Constitution in order to think that this is okay.
I have to say this because I just feel compelled to. Nobody wants anyone to feel like they're in danger. I've been at several of these Second Amendment speech events where either supervisors have been confronted by their constituents or not, Scott. And there's always two or three folks who speak out, I want to feel safe, I want to feel safe. And several of them have expressed how nervous they are to be in a room full of people that disagree with them, yet they don't get shouted down. They don't get names hurled at them. They don't get physical items hurled at them the way conservatives do when they show up to speak at a private engagement on a college campus, or dare to say wear a red baseball cap with "Make America Great" on it again. So I think are people seeing this? Because I'm sure most of these crowds are conservatives, but I can't statistically pencil out the fact that they're all just the Republicans of Virginia. I've got to think there are some Democrats in this crowd who are realizing now the difference between the unhinged left that are going to shout down their opponents and the conservatives who just want to be left alone.
I was watching the Stafford County Second Amendment sanctuary hearing that was going on last night because of all the other data that I needed to compile had been done, and I was just waiting on Stafford County. So I was watching that feed live, and, they had some fantastic speakers come up and give their point of view. 9 out of 10 of them at least were pro-gun, and then you had a couple, maybe 2 or 3 Democrats come up. And one thing I noticed was after the Democrats spoke, first of all, nobody interrupted them. And then after they spoke, the crowd clapped, the commissioners clapped, and everything was fine. So in other words, nobody got shot. Mm-hmm. Nobody got anything thrown at them. Nobody got shutted down, and it was a peaceful assembly. So this is the kind of thing that goes on when a bunch of conservatives get together.
Yeah,
a bunch of gun owners. Mm-hmm. That every single person, well, almost every single person in that room was a gun owner, and nobody got hurt.
And everyone was respectful to one another. And maybe this is, do you sense in your readers at Gun Rights Watch that there are Democrats that are realizing how far things have gone, that maybe this is overplaying a very short-lived majority in the House?
Most of the readers, obviously, at Gun Rights Watch are devout Second Amendment supporters.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Occasionally we get someone that is on the left. What's really nice though is that I think that most of the Democrats or just people who are kind of not knowledgeable about guns or not knowledgeable about gun laws, and they come on and they start talking. Most of them have been, luckily for us, they've been pretty civil, and we've had some pretty good conversations. So we don't really. I'm not sure why, but we've been largely immune from the rabid attacks of the left. So it's sort of hard for me to put that question into perspective.
Yeah. I wonder if there are, as we watch the president's support in the black community go up through the roof, and the feelings for impeachment fall, and I just wonder if the Democratic Party is overplaying its hand almost to the way the Republicans mailed it in on a couple of elections and lost their majorities. But Scott, what about what comes next? We've already watched the governor equivocate on, we'll grandfather them in. And then there's a lot of folks who are saying, these won't even make it out of committee. This was just to make Michael Bloomberg happy that we filed some of these. What is your sense from what is actually going to hit the floor by the time, say, VCDL Lobby Day comes up on January 20th?
Boy, that's a hard question. I mean, I'm not from Virginia, and I don't have a real feel for what's going to happen. You have to have the sense that the governor and the Democrats are going to have to back down, on some level. But, back to what you were saying about grandfathering them in. If the law is that all of these guns are going to be banned because they're so dangerous, then why would you give an inch and allow some of them to still be in people's hands? It just doesn't. It's really disingenuous, and it makes you think that these people are not. They're not trying to do this to save lives. They they simply just hate gun owners.
Mm-hmm. That's well put. Are you sure you're not a lawyer? Are you sure we can't convince you to take a bar exam? So that was a well played
I'm just a guy
argument.
who reads a lot.
Cross-examination by Scott Prevett of the Gun Rights Watch. What about other states? As you said, you're watching this across. Virginia is, I guess, trying to be out in front of this. But what about other states that are looking at what Virginia is doing? I mean, my home state of New York did some amazing, unbanking maneuvers that I believe one of our Congress people, Jennifer Wexton, has taken up the idea of forcing credit card companies to identify any gun purchases and to notify the authorities if there are any ammunition purchases and things like that, which you rattle off. I think that's a Third Amendment violation. But beyond that, what are some of the other states doing, Scott?
Well, this really basically got its legs in Illinois. They weren't actually the first to try something like this. I mean, I think the movement really started in Oregon in 2012 or 2013 when they started passing Second Amendment preservation ordinances. That's what they're called. And those actually have more teeth because they're enshrined into law in these counties, just the way the state laws are. They're allowed to do that. And so they basically have said, no, we're not going to play your game, Oregon. We're going to allow people to have guns that you think are dangerous because we know that they're not. And so there's been several counties there, but that's different than what we're seeing in places like Illinois and Virginia, and of course now we've got there's Tennessee, there's Texas, there's a big movement in Florida, believe it or not, that is not getting talked about at all. I've got a whole map of Florida that's going to be published. I mean, it's got to be within the next week because I've just been waiting and waiting. Been so busy with Virginia, and now we've got Kentucky. Apparently, they had their first county pass a Second Amendment sanctuary the other day, and there's a slew of others that are looking at it. So I've got to cover that. I have my work cut out for me.
Well, it is the amendment that sort of cornerstones all the other ones. How can you guarantee free speech if somebody can just overwhelm you with force? And as I pointed out to one of our local supervisors boards when I spoke to them, the word gun actually doesn't appear in the Second Amendment anywhere. It is a right to take up arms, whatever those arms need be, and defend not just your freedoms but yourself at the root of it. And I think that's what government really wants us to stop doing, Scott. Is that overstating it, or is that a fair thing to say?
No, that was a totally fair assessment. It says arms, and arms can be bullets, they can be knives, they can be pepper spray, tasers, nunchucks, you name it. There was a couple of years ago there was a case out of, I think it was Massachusetts, where a woman had a can of pepper spray, and the Supreme Court ruled that was perfectly constitutional. So yeah, we're seeing attacks on lots of different weapons.
GunRightsWatch.com is where you find. So, what are you covering right now? You said Florida is a big. Are they starting their own movement, or are they close to having a full map? You said you're going to publish.
Yeah, there's been 10 counties and one town. Last time I looked, that was about a week ago. I know there's more coming along. So, yeah, I've got to get back and do some research on that and find out where that's going and then start talking about it.
Do you think that there's any legs to the idea, and we've seen this put forth by some Virginia General Assembly members, that, we won't ban firearms or even ammunition. Some of them take the ammunition and say, well, what if we ban the ammunition? And they've been told that doesn't work. But what if they do what they did with cigarettes and just go after it with confiscatory taxes? Have you seen that in any places around the country in your coverage, Scott?
I have seen that. I know Illinois is trying something like that. I mean, to me, that's a blatant violation of the word infringe. I mean, infringe means to limit in any way. And if you try to tax something into oblivion, then obviously you're limiting people's access to it. And, in my opinion, that's completely unconstitutional.
Well, how do people sign up for your newsletters, or should they just on a daily basis go to gunrightswatch.com and get it? Do you have ways people can support what you're doing?
I've been resisting putting up a donate button. I think I may have to, just because the traffic now is so big. We need to get a new server. Basically, go to the website. If you want to sign up for the newsletter, that's great. We haven't published the newsletter yet. That's coming soon. It's a question of there's so many news stories I'm chasing that it's difficult to find the time to do things.
Well, I know that the listeners appreciate what you do and would love to, help you out in any way, shape, or form, even if it is just, get on your mailing list. And so, you can show that you've got quite a readership and maybe, do it with a sponsorship apparatus as well. But we appreciate your visit this week and your coverage of all the Virginia Second Amendment sanctuary legislations varying from 78 to 106. And I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And have a Merry Christmas as well.
You too, Joe. Thanks so much.
And thank you all for listening this week to Freedom and Prosperity Radio. It's our honor to bring it to you every year here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. We were thinking back that this is easily our 11th year in broadcast, and we've certainly traveled a lot of roads. We've even covered the General Assembly when we've had Republican governors, senators, and House members. So we have more to come, certainly for 2020, and it's going to be a busy time. But on this holiday season, for all of us here, the Taylors and everyone at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy, have a very, very Merry Christmas, and we will see you as we approach New Year's. Until then, so long, and thanks for all the fish.